Welcome to the Forest of Thought with me, Ingrid Rieser. This winter, writer and filmmaker Sarah Thomas went on a journey with her newly published book, and fortuitous circumstances brought her to Sweden and to my house. Her memoir, The Raven's Nest, is a meditation on her time spent in Iceland and explores, among other things, how identity and language are interwoven with landscape and ecology. What does it mean to fall in love with a place, with its human and non-human inhabitants? And how may we each do our little part in mending the world?
For me, the raven's nest is one of the most resilient shapes that we could be inspired by, because it can fall apart, or some parts of it can fall apart, just as we're going to have to let some parts of the way we do things fall away, and we're going to have to go, well, which are the bits that we keep and which are the bits that need to fall away, which are the bits that we'd never thought of using before but suddenly find their place.
Sarah is a writer and documentary filmmaker with a PhD in Interdisciplinary Studies. In her work, she explores our entanglements with the living world. Sarah and I met in early spring and talked in my living room, sipping cups of tea as the sky darkened outside. If you want to say just a little something to introduce yourself and a bit about your journey.
Okay, sure. I'm Sarah Thomas, and I'm a writer who's not exactly on a book tour. I'm more on a journey with my book as a travel companion, partly to escape the dreichness of Scottish winter, but mainly I've been wanting to do this long train journey since I finished my PhD in late 2019, to kind of reconnect with old friends and to connect with Europe, actually, in the face of Brexit. And but then COVID happened, so travel couldn't happen. And I was really lucky that last year Interrail had a 50% sale.
I also bought one of those.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh my God, and have you done it?
Yeah, I went on a tour and recorded interviews for the podcasts last summer.
Amazing.
Yeah. Lovely.
And I kind of knew it was the kind of deal that just was never going to happen again.
Yeah.
It was a gift. And so I decided to come traveling now in the winter, partly also because heating has got crazily expensive. And I just thought it might actually be cheaper to be away than to stay at home.
Crazy.
And so, I could do all of those things. I could sort of explore travel in a way that isn't, or you don't know what's going to happen every day. And that's the kind of travel that I love. There's this Icelandic word, óvissufærð, which means an unknown journey. And it's where you just head out and you're not sure where you want to go. And I think it's a kind of attention to the world that it gives you that I really feel like is a practice. And I've had some really lovely moments where I've wound up kind of meeting some people and they've invited me to stay, and I've learned, it's not been so much that I've ended up doing something with my book, but I might have learned a song from them, or I feel like it's also important for culture bearing in some way, for learning something from one another that then you don't know where that seed's going to pop up years to come. And I just love traveling in this way.
Well, it's lovely that it brought you here also unexpectedly. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
No, and this is basically, I'm sitting in the home of somebody who, 2 days ago I didn't know, but we have friends in common, and it was Isaac who said, "Oh, you should have stayed with us." And I was like, "Well, I didn't know you." But I love that we managed to make it happen, and here I am sitting in a place that's incredibly special, actually, in the whole of Sweden. So, this feels like one of those parts of the journey that will be really memorable.
Lovely.
And I've been, the way I've been touring the book a lot in the UK and in Iceland is through an Icelandic tradition called kvöldvaka, where you, in the evening, do a reading to the household whilst they're doing the work with wool of spinning, knitting, darning. And that is a tradition that went on for several centuries in Iceland, when it was a very poor country and most people lived on farms. But it's something that, in spite of that poverty and the scarceness of resources, has given rise to an incredibly literate population. And I think in these times where, a lot of nations are finding life very hard. It shows you that even with this very simple act of just coming together in a room, sitting for an hour and listening to a story, being read to, whilst doing something with your hands, it feels like a profoundly human thing to do, and therefore it feels good in your body, and it's good for the nervous system, and it's convivial and gives you headspace all at the same time. So I thought, I'll travel with my book and see where there's opportunities to do that.
Amazing. That's great. That's an amazing trip. So you've been traveling with your book as a companion, as you said, and this book is The Raven's Nest. And, basically you're taking the reader along kind of on this journey of where you fall in love basically with Iceland and with an Icelandic man. And it's kind of about how your life gets entangled with that place and its inhabitants. It's human inhabitants, it's non-human inhabitants, and you're calling it an ecological memoir, which is kind of like a new category that you've basically just made up there. So could you say something about that? And what does that mean? What is an ecological memoir?
Yeah, I'm calling it that because for me, if it was just a memoir, it would suggest that it's kind of about my life or using my life as a way to tell a story about something. And I think the sense of what I was profoundly transformed by being there, in part because it's incredibly, because of marrying into an Icelandic family, that sense of you are part of a web of relations, and that's very clear, and it manifests itself in ways that are equally beautiful and frustrating, as in the in-laws might just walk in. I just noticed you doing that to your mother-in-law. You just walked into a house and like, oh yeah, I remember that. So there's that, but then there's also you feel really safe because you know that you're never going to be without anything. There's a fisherman in the family, there's a sheep farmer in the family. We had always enough food, and someone could fix the car and help fix the house, and also that's just within the family. Then within the community, it's like a very sort of interconnected, but in a way that people are maybe appear to be self-contained in that very kind of Nordic way, but then they know exactly what each other's up to and kind of everything about them at the same time. You just don't need to talk about it. So yeah, this sense of like a profound relationality between people, but also between the people and the place that they're in. There was a continuousness with it. And I found the experience I had was of somebody who had moved through the world. It's not to say that I deeply engage with places, but that was the first time where I felt like woven into a place, and that I was at stake in it. That's the most important thing, I think, that, if you make the wrong decisions in that kind of climate, you might die. So I had a really close relationship with the natural world, to the point where, like, I only start calling it the natural world when I came back to the UK. It's like, it's just where you are. It's where you live. It's not separate. So ecological in the sense that everything connects with everything else. And I tried to manifest that in the writing, in the way that it was written. So each chapter is kind of semi-discrete, but echoes and tugs across to other chapters. And then also another way that I've kind of brought the natural world into the prose, or not even brought it in. I've been taken my cue from something that's not human made, and that is the raven's nest. This nest that I actually encountered, that was an incredible sculpture about a meter wide. It was really a piece of art, and it was full of bits of bone, like sheep shoulder blade and a knife handle and a TV aerial and a rake and fishing net. So this raven had kind of gathered all of these bits of detritus, whether they be man-made or vegetable or animal, and made this robust, beautiful vessel for the continuation of life. And I thought that was a wonderful metaphor for what a story should be. And I was also really inspired by Ursula Le Guin's essay, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, which is just a fantastic, it's like 4 pages long.
Do you want to say something about that for people who haven't heard of it?
Yeah, so I wrote this book as the creative part of a practice-based PhD in Interdisciplinary Studies, and The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction takes inspiration from a feminist anthropologist's carrier bag theory of evolution, Elizabeth Fisher, she's called. And that is to say that she was challenging this idea that the spear or the tool, the sort of thrusting tool, was the defining characteristic of evolution. And it was more important that there was a vessel, because what's the point in going out and hunting a load of meat if you've got nothing to put it in? So the thing that made us be able to evolve is actually the bag or the bowl or the papoose or the home, anything that contains life. And so Ursula Le Guin took up that idea and comments that the narrative arc that we're told is the way that stories are supposed to be, that has a beginning, a middle and an end. There's this sort of building of tension of some kind. There's a conflict that's overcome and then it lands and resolves neatly. She said that that's the story of the hunter who's gone out and brought down the thing. Someone's maybe died and then they've brought it back to the village. And the story of the people who were just sat back at the village husking oats and singing songs is not so interesting because there's no drama. It's just the ongoingness of life. But we got co-opted into the hunter's story, and that's the death story. So what's the life story? And so I think memoir is a life story, but I wanted to take that in its very broadest sense and to go, well, what would it look like if you also included all the lives that were there? And so I tried to, even though the story is carried through the making and unmaking of a relationship between two people, me and my husband at the time, we are both incredibly entangled in the world, and there's all these other stories of ravens and seals and the walls of a house and the booming of the sea. They're all given a presence that's as foregrounded as the other human characters, which is not uncommon in Nordic literature, because that's the reality of being there. But I think it's maybe less common in the UK or was. Yeah.
Well, and it's you were saying how you grew up partly in Kenya, and it seemed like from what you've been saying and also from reading your book that you were not really able to fully connect to and engage with the wider world or the more than human world while you were growing up there, while you were living there, and maybe the same with your time in England, and that meeting Iceland kind of brought out new levels of those kinds of relationships for you. So could you say something about that? What was that? Did that have to do with just the harshness in one way of the climate, which kind of demands that of you? Or were there other clues as to what it is that brings about those deepening kinds of relationships that I think also a lot of people long for, but that we've perhaps lost the skill of maintaining or the knowledge of how to maintain? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's a very powerful landscape, as in, it feels it does something to you physically. It's awe, I think, is what you're experiencing, which is an incredibly sort of complex emotion that opens up other emotions as well. It can allow you to properly grieve, or it can allow you to really feel joy, or it's a portal, I think, or... And it is an incredibly beautiful and strong landscape. So I think it sort of moved me in a way that England, being much more built upon and, gentle, doesn't. But it also kind of crackled with an animacy that I also hadn't experienced in England, that felt to me to do with something where the past was very present. The past was very present in the present. So, you knew that maybe only a certain number of feet had passed along that path since, someone had 1,000 years ago. And now you've got like these incredible stories of Viking spears emerging because snow melt is happening really quickly. There's these things coming out of glaciers, and it's just like, wow. So there was that, but also so in Kenya, the landscape could be equally awe-inspiring, but also you're constantly on the alert because there's, dangerous megafauna who might kill you. Whereas in Iceland, you can relax in that regard, especially in summer. Yeah, I think it was that. It was a feeling to me of where this so-called wilderness, that's not really a wilderness, people live there, but it is wild in its own way, in the sense that it's self-willed to a greater extent than anywhere else I'd lived. But that could be somewhere that's home. And those two things converging is, I think, what made it so powerful.
Do you want to say something more about your relationship to to some of the non-human inhabitants that you met? I was thinking of, you mentioned the raven's nest. So, yeah.
And this raven, I think that was the beginning of my curiosity about ravens. And it's kind of easy to be in love with ravens in Iceland because there's a sort of community-wide fondness for them, to the extent that they're called krummi. So a raven, the word for a raven is rap, which I think is amazing because it sounds exactly like the sound that they make. It's like rap, rap. But they're called krummi, like a kind of a nickname. And all ravens are called krummi. It's like, oh, look, Krummi's outside eating the... So I had this experience where it was literally the first morning after I'd moved into this old, early 20th century house. I was sitting eating breakfast and I heard a tapping on the roof, and I wasn't quite sure what it was. And then it went on longer, and then I heard sort of claws. And then I saw an old man walking in our front garden that I didn't know, and being a Brit, I kind of found it rather bizarre that someone else was in my garden and wondered what on earth he was doing. And it turns out it's the neighbour, and he'd been looking after the house in the 8 years that it had sat empty before we bought it, and he was putting out these bones on a rock, and we asked him, what it's about, and he said he's feeding the raven because the woman who used to live in the house for 70 years before we did, she used to put out bones for the raven. And so they had become used to that. And it was like a kind of a responsibility in a way, and a way of being neighbourly to another species. And so this tapping...
They do that here to the... now I can't think of the English word. The Swedish word is talgoxe. So that's one of the... Well, they're, one of the sparrow-sized birds. They also come and knock on the door if we've forgotten to put out food in the winter, or they'll come and knock on the window, and they sit on the windowsill and they kind of look at you to see if you're there. They're like, oh gosh, we forgot to put out food, and so then we have to go out with something. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's perfectly normal, like worldwide, to feed birds. It's just, I guess, like when you're feeding them with bones and flesh, it feels like more of a thing than putting out a few seeds. And also, like, because ravens are such characters as well, so they kind of weave themselves into your day. They have far more impact than these small birds on me anyway, and on obviously on the whole culture, because ravens are really significant in Iceland. Ravens were there was 2 ravens that sat on Odin's shoulders, Hugin and Munin, he'd send them off around the world in the morning to gather the news, and then they'd speak it into his ears. So mythologically they hold significance, but also as a sort of everyday presence. In the winter especially, all the other birds have migrated and raven's still around. And he just, sits on the rooftop kind of crunking away and making his presence felt, and has this kind of, this manner that's quite kind of bawdy and kind of saunters around. And I think they're so funny, so smart. So it felt like, I was like, okay, I'm going to have this guy for a neighbour. I mean, I don't know if this guy was the same guy or was a girl, each time, but it felt like this ongoing relationship. And then you sort of begin to notice what they're up to around the place and how much they love to have fun and play around. So like one time I saw them skiing down a slope, and that was just like, oh wow.
So they were skiing on their
just
on their feet?
Their feet. Yeah. And it was just this slope. I saw these 2 thin tracks down a slope just above the road, and I looked up, and then these 2 ravens appeared at the top and just skied down and then flew up and did it all over again.
Yeah, that's so cool.
It's amazing. I think a lot more creatures have fun than we think. Yeah,
absolutely.
So I mean, that was just one of many creatures that kept coming up. I mean, seals was another one that came up in different ways. And so I tried to write the book in a way that you're traveling on a journey with the narrator as her relationship or her mode of relating to the world shifts as well. And I don't ever land upon a fixed position. So like we meet raven in different ways, we meet seal in different ways, and sometimes as meat as well, you know, it's not romanticized. So I keep coming back around to these creatures, and I'm not saying I employed them as motifs, they're far more than motifs, but like, yeah, I didn't want to show them as just one thing, and wanted to show the paradoxes and the complexities as well.
You also learned Icelandic during your time there, and
to an extent.
You learned, some Icelandic. It seems quite a bit while you were there. And so do you want to say something about that, or what it was like to learn that language? Because and how it perhaps affected and changed your way of relating to that place?
Yeah, I think it was like a parallel process with the things that I've talked about, the kind of power of the landscape, these creatures being really woven into the day-to-day, and then the language at the same time, trying to learn it was through immersion. There wasn't any courses running for foreigners at the time because there wasn't enough newly arriving foreigners. So I kind of literally learned Icelandic through listening to my extended family talking to one another. And I noticed that Icelandic words, for the most part, seem to be sort of compound words. So a word that sounds like a very complicated word is actually 3 words. So, I mean, the most famous example being the volcano that erupted in 2010. Eyjafjallajökull. This is Eyjafjallajökull. Eyja is island. Fjalla, like belonging to the mountain. Jökull, glacier. So island, mountain, glacier. And I noticed then parts of words appearing in other words. And so it was like a bit like when you learn to read the stars and learn the constellations. And it was, I think that process of kind of things kind of knitting together and then revealing a new reality was really powerful, and showing me the way that the language showed a way to think that was a different way to think than I had. And so I could begin to even like invent words along the lines of that mode of thought. And it's kind of like, it's very poetic language. So the word for echo is bergmál, which means the language of the mountain. And that also, I mean, it's a beautiful word, but also it animates the mountain as something that can speak. But it's exactly the right word for what an echo is. It's like the mountain speaking back. And so when you start thinking in that way, you can kind of create words. And obviously when there's new inventions, like they have to find a word that draws on the pool of words that there are that sufficiently describes that thing. So like a computer, they took tala, to count, and volva, which is an oracle, or CRS, and then put them together to make tolva. So a computer is a number oracle, which is exactly what it is. But it's just a very beautiful way to think. And so then the world around you becomes quite rich and crackly. Yeah,
and it was kind of like what we were talking about when we met the other day. that it's interesting. It's kind of like what David Abram talks about as well in his book Spell of the Sensuous, and how we've gradually removed language from landscape. That before, language and landscape were much more intimately intertwined, and that somehow in a place like Iceland, that intimate relationship seems to be more in place still. And like you were saying, maybe more words are onomatopoetic, like you mentioned Rafn, like that has that, which is it's funny because it's a lot of Icelandic words are of course similar to Norwegian, even though in Iceland things have stayed much more true to the Old Norse. So in Norwegian it's Ravn, which has already, I think, lost a bit of the
Plop.
Yeah, exactly. The onomatopoetic quality of it. So I think that's also really, of course, it's possible to write in ways that try to reweave language and landscape, but that's fascinating when so much of it is already contained in the language, in the way it seems to be more in Icelandic.
And that's what I tried to do. I sort of tried to take that mode of expressing and then like do it in English. Yeah. So I think there's a piece that I wouldn't mind reading at this moment.
That would be lovely.
Could I borrow your book?
Of course.
So I'm going to read you a couple of sections from a chapter called A Walk in My Valley, which is where the words started coming together for me. And hopefully it'll show you how I was talking about how these parts of words come up in other words. So this happens in summer. It's just as winter's over, and we're in June, so we're around the midsummer where it's not getting dark at all. But for now, we are all beginning to relax into this new life, and life courses into us. The fundamentals are taken care of. Each morning when we open the hen's gate, they leave the coop and peck around in the wildflower meadow at the back of the house. The verdant grasses are now taller than them and grow ever upwards towards the sun. Everything is colour. The world is no longer blue or grey or white. It has the sound of summer, even the sound of the sun, sol, in it. Yellow brennisole, meadow buttercup, glowing under our chins. Melasol, pale yellow Arctic poppies which track the sun's path. There are the deep pink flames of huntasora, sheep sorrel, the leaves citrus in our mouths, and the pale pink confetti of hrafnaklukka, raven's clock, cuckoo flower in English. This time of year when the ravens have cruised up to the cliffs and crags to tend their young is the same time I would hear a cuckoo call in England. The Icelandic name signals the retreat of a bird, the English an arrival. Among all this, the bright red of the hen's combs emerges now and then from the grasses. Every evening at exactly 7, any change in light indistinguishable to me, the hens return through the open gate of the coop, process up the ramp and through the small opening into the shed, made small enough that an Arctic fox cannot follow them. And then I'll read a little part from the end of the chapter. The first words I learned were the names of wildflowers and herbs, and Bjarni and I made our first road trip in Marjabjalla, our camper van, in June 2009, at a time of year when the flowers sing loudly for 2 weeks and the leaves are most potent. I painted some on the inside of the van door, with their names, Geldinganapur, Kloelting, Hollurt, so they would be the last thing I saw when I fell asleep, and the first when I woke up. Gyða, his mother, has always given me Icelandic herb tea at Christmas, a mix of leaves she has picked that sprout from the hillsides in early summer. She has shown me the plants and told me their names. This year, I want to gather my own herbs in my valley and give some back to her. I call Geetha. Hi. I'm wondering if it's still okay to gather the herbs for tea. It's better in early June before they've begun to flower. The taste is strong in the leaves then, but just try it. You remember what you're picking? I don't think of the plants in English. I got to know them here. What I see in my mind's eye when she asks the question is their shape, their colour, and the sound of their name. Ljónslappi, lion's feet, rjúpnalauf, ptarmigan leaf, blóðberg, blood of the rock. Only later would these shapes and images become hitched onto alpine lady's mantle, mountain dryas, and wild thyme, when I had read about them in books. That's right, but Sarah, she interrupts unusually. Yeah? What's happened? Do you know you're speaking to me in Icelandic, in full sentences? An invisible moment has arrived in which these words I have been gathering, like herbs, have infused. There are enough words in me now to improvise a world, to express and to be understood. I have been speaking Icelandic, and so has she. Maybe it was being away. It allowed the words to settle. A mutual joy fills the distance down the telephone line and brings us closer. We can communicate. I walk out the door with this newfound freedom and power to gather herbs in my valley. Here, walking among the flowers and the fundamentals, I am allowed and able to have a relationship with this place. Through words, through imagination, through living and tending, I can go back to a beginning, not the beginning. There is no beginning and there is no end, but a beginning nonetheless. One in which my thoughts are not yet housed, one in which they make a home for themselves and take their cue from the place they are in. So I think, it was really apparent to me as I was learning the language that it was so entangled with that particular place, and it allowed me to kind of lay down some new architecture. It felt like the walls of my thoughts that had previously housed my thoughts didn't necessarily serve the function anymore, and it gave me space to kind of go to something that felt more humble and could contain paradox and was also quite wild sometimes. It's hard to describe the feeling of that, but it's a fascinating language. It was incredibly sort of liberating, and also allowed me a different way back into my own language, into English. So, discovering the etymology of some words, and place names in particular, where I was living in the northwest of England. There's a lot of Norse place names up there. Yeah. So beginning to sort of understand what the place actually is, or who it's named after, that also gives it an animacy that makes it far more rich experience of being there.
Yeah. So you're a writer, but you also have a background in anthropology, in visual anthropology. And, part of the story is that as you get to Iceland, your plan is all along to kind of make this some sort of documentary film or some sort of anthropological film, and it never happens, at least not in the way that you envisioned it. But something we were talking about previously that also becomes apparent in the book is how you sort of arrive maybe more with an anthropological mindset of trying to understand. And then I remember something you said on Friday was that the more you learned, the less you understood. The more you learned about the place, the less you understood. And also that led to a kind of shift in how you were trying to relate to that place. So can you say something about that?
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because like that trajectory of like learning more and then understanding less and then reaching a place of acceptance with the lack of understanding in some ways is a way of then learning more. It's like a fractal experience.
Right.
So it's like if you understand that you can't understand, then you've got somewhere.
Something.
Yeah. and then you're on a level, you know, with certain people, and then you can make jokes in a certain way. And I mean, I think it's true of any place and any point in life. And I think I found that about Iceland. It was as if it was an expression of a psyche, like a fundamental expression that in a way was like a, I don't want to say petri dish because that suggests a sort of controlled lab environment, but like anything that might play out in Iceland is also playing out elsewhere. But there it's very apparent because it's such open space. You can kind of see things playing out. And also within talking sort of about emotions and behaviours, you know, it's like it might well have also just been the time of my life that it was, you know, sort of late 20s into 30s. Certain things are dawning on you that is not necessarily Iceland. It might just be life, but it happens in a really strong way there. That you sort of you can't like distract yourself with things as easily. I think everything's very in your face and present.
There's nowhere to hide, sort of. Everything's out in the open.
Yeah, and also like, for example, here, if you were going through something difficult, you could kind of constantly be meeting up with people and go to the cinema, and you know, there's lots of like consumerist choices you could make that could distract you from what you're going for. Whereas there's something about that landscape that just makes you have to face whatever you're facing.
Especially the winters, I can imagine.
Yeah. And to realise simultaneously that you are alone, but also the opposite is true. You know, you're very much part of a weave of a community, but like essentially we can only deal with our own shit, which is true of anywhere, but it's just that there was no distraction. But coming back around to your question, I think something I never experienced a place where like paradox seemed to come so thick and fast.
Yeah.
And that was an important sort of capacity to cultivate, sort of the ability to hold paradox.
You have
be completely fine with that.
Are there certain things, or what are some of the things that you're thinking about?
It's very hard to kind of come up with an example. That's the problem.
Well, you were saying previously also that having a close relationship with, for example, the seals and admiring them as living creatures, but then also being okay with hunting and eating them. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't hunt seals, but
No.
I did. So my father-in-law occasionally did, and he had this bucket of what's called selspik. It's like the blubber that they keep in sour whey. I mean, he was unusual because he still lived very close to an era that a lot of others have to some extent left behind, but he likes this old Icelandic food that most people only eat at it's called Thorrablot. It's like mid-February kind of time where there's a feast that happens that traditionally that would have been when you're really scraping the barrel, the kind of food that had been preserved and there wasn't anything fresh left. And he just loved that food. And he'd love to, you know, there's things like pickled, like ram's testicles that are pickled in this sour whey, and he'd sort of stick his knife into one and bring it out and hold it in my face and say and offer me some, and you know, of course he was like teasing me, and he was a great impetus actually for learning Icelandic because he was always teasing me and I wanted to be able to tease him back. But in terms of paradoxes, I mean, beautiful ones. For example, one that's memorable to me because I've written about it in the book and it was so profound when I was there, is that I read a book at sort of 2:00 in the morning or something on the front step of my house during winter under a full moon because it was bright enough to read by, because you've got this amazing huge moon and all the snow is reflecting that light back at you. But not only was it bright enough, but it was brighter then than it had been during the day.
Right.
You know, so it's like getting your head around that as being a truth. So that's a more like physical landscape sort of. But it's not really a paradox there. It's only a paradox with the previous way of thinking where I go, well, there's night and there's day and day's brighter than night.
Yeah.
So it's only a paradox with a certain kind of way of thought. But yeah, those kind of things, which then opens a capacity to kind of jump off that train of going, well, this is how things are. This is how rational reality is. It's like, actually, what are we doing? What do we know? What do we know about the combination of things that are what reality consists of? And that's incredibly motivating and inspiring and liberating, I think, to go, actually, I don't know, and then be curious. Because if we're not here to be curious, I'm not really sure what we're here for.
Yeah, and there's something about that acceptance of not knowing, of the unknown, and trusting. I think we lack trust in ourselves in that we can handle that we can handle what might happen. And it seems from the way you're writing about, you know, your husband at the time and his family and or just in general, the Icelandic way of relating to that is because of relationships and knowledge of that place and the land and everything. Then they have a trust that things will work out because things have worked out previously, and you know, there's always somebody that we could call or reach out to, and so on. And it's interesting because maybe in a place like Iceland, the harshness and demands of the climate and the weather kind of force you into that trust in a way where in other places, like here in this area of Sweden, it is theoretically possible to think that you're in control anyway. And then that trust starts to disintegrate along also with the relationships.
And it's not just the weather, it was like the fact that you're living on a volcano.
Right, yeah,
you know?
Of course.
So like the ground is literally kind of shifting beneath your feet. So those two combined sort of fundamental uncertainties give rise to a mindset whereby it's kind of not possible really to make a plan that you know is definitely going to happen. So you have to kind of retain this sense, this state of like provisional intention, but with an openness to things turning out completely differently, which is what I feel is an incredibly useful state to cultivate in the times that we live in. We don't know what's going to happen, and we can kind of make ourselves, like, we can skill ourselves and make ourselves prepared, and we can help one another and join up, and be like, cultivate a sense of receptivity and the ability to respond. And that's kind of why I wanted to write this book, really, because it's like there's so many beautiful stories and like beautiful learnings, but also, you know, overall it's like, well, how do we build ourselves and our world in these times that in a way that is resilient to breaking down and being remade again, which is why this metaphor of the raven's nest that I use for the title, but also the way that I structured the book. For me, the raven's nest is one of the most resilient shapes that we could be inspired by, because it can fall apart, or some parts of it can fall apart, just as we're going to have to let some parts of the way we do things fall away, and we're going to have to go, well, which are the bits that we keep, and which are the bits that we can weave into something that exists, which are the bits that need to fall away, which are the bits that we'd never thought of using before but suddenly find their place. And so I decided to build this structure like a nest, partly because the cycles of light and darkness that inform the existence or absence of life in the yearly cycle, that's the most profound thing. It's not so much about any of the other elements, really. Like, yes, those elements are dramatic, but the most dramatic thing is the absence or presence of light and dark. And so inherently, it's not a linear narrative, but it does inherently go through those cycles of light and dark. So it's a cyclical thing, but it has many threads. And there's this lovely sort of coincidental word play that happened whereby I had shot lots of footage that I've never made into a film. And you call raw footage rushes. And so I wrote in my thesis that this was a part of, So I was left with an armful of rushes, not knowing what to do with them. And so I built a nest, because rushes are obviously also a nest building material. So it's a really sort of filmic narrative, and there's lots of threads that don't neatly join one to the other, but they all weave into these cycles.
Well, something I wanted to ask you about is I've talked to a lot of people on the podcast about this importance of building relationships, and how that is something that allows us to be more open to the unknown, because it helps us to feel safe and held in that. It's not the only thing that helps to do that. I think there's lots of things, but it's one of the things. And at the same time, there's in a lot of traditional societies, and traditionally the family provides a lot of those relationships, the family and the extended family. And there's something very beautiful with that, but it can also feel, I know also myself from growing up in a very small place, a sort of small village in the mountains in Norway, that it can also be a bit, oppressive, especially if you if you don't fit in, or there can be conflicts, and there can be the demands of the clan. And so did those kinds of things come up for you there, in terms of how do we build relationships and resilience, but also with the openness that we perhaps didn't have previously when we were, a few generations ago, naturally living more connected lives?
Yeah, well, I think, these days what constitutes a household is really shifting, just by nature of, what's falling apart, and that there's a housing crisis going on, and, the standard kind of nuclear family thing is far less common than people would like us to believe. So I feel like in some ways, this sort of cobbled together households and families is way more realistic and and resilient response to what we're facing, and can often be a lot more fun, frankly. It's like, so I think that virtue of it being quite kind of like diverse in the deepest sense, like a gathering of people being diverse, and each one bringing something to that. It's not to say I'm saying anything bad about the nuclear family. Like, nuclear families that work are a good sort of fundament, but there's also many other ways to make families and to make kin, and not just with other humans, to incorporate life, which is why the nest as a metaphor. So I think by virtue of globalization has brought us into contact with so many different people, so many different kinds of people. And so if you are going to connect, you're not just going to connect with your own family and only people like you. And then by virtue of that diversity, it's going to be a much more open experience than it would have been. So it's like, what do we carry forwards that's good, and what can we actually move on from?
Another thing that you've said is that you've written this book for it to be read aloud, and so you mentioned the kveldvaka, but that you also, in this process of writing it, you also were continuously reading it out loud as a mode of writing, actually. So I don't know, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I didn't read it, I didn't write it to be read aloud as in that's definitely what I have in mind.
Of course.
It's like
but that should be a significant way that people can engage with the book.
Absolutely,
is to read it aloud to each other.
Yeah, there was a sort of orality in the mode of kind of relating to one another through speech that I noticed. Because that sounds very anthropological, doesn't it? It's like the way people talked. There was a way that if something had happened in the day, it would be related as a story, and it would be embellished, depending on how well it had gone down. And so I'd hear about a certain, quite probably quite mundane event that's happened, but I'd hear it multiple times, and so then it went into my memory much better as well. And when it's particularly funny or weird, you know, it stays with you, and then I wanted to try it, you know. And so I feel like it was in my body in that way of being a story. So it kind of almost couldn't come out any other way. But also I was just really inspired by that way of relating to one another, and also by this Icelandic tradition of kvöldvaka, which we talked about. I mean, I experienced it through my father-in-law. He would read aloud to us at the summer house, and it's just a lovely thing to do, to sit together listening. And so I thought, wouldn't it be lovely if, you know, that's something that the book could do as well. So yeah, while I was writing it, I had to sort of speak it aloud to see what felt nice to say, what felt good in the mouth and in the body. And so I would practice chapters, you know, when I got it to a state that it was ready enough that I could take it into the world. I took it to kind of spoken word nights, some of the chapters, because also then there's something that happens with the audience feedback, sort of energetically. You can feel when they're excited or pensive or, so I knew which bits were working or not. And then when the manuscript was finished, I made a commitment to read it out loud from start to finish to an audience before it found a publisher.
Wow.
Because I thought once it finds a publisher, it's going to get fixed somehow in a certain state. Obviously, it's already printed on paper, but like once it's that version, that's going to become a book that goes into the world, and that's that. So I wanted to read it kind of to the wind first, and not to the wind, but I wanted it to just be in the air. But unfortunately, COVID happened bang in the middle of these sessions that I was doing.
Right.
I started doing kvöldvaka in a small Scottish village near to where I now live, and it was so beautiful. It was like a candlelit evening up in an art gallery, in the attic room of an art gallery, and so many people came, like 20, 25 people came every week.
Wow. For
about 10 weeks, and then COVID happened, and I thought, God, what are we going to do? Because I don't really want to do this on Zoom.
No.
It would take away that feeling of being together. But when COVID kept going for a really long time, I thought, well, I've hexed myself because I'm not going to find a publisher until I've got to the end of this.
Right.
And so it's actually through Dougal Tynes' monthly calls that I'm part of with A School Called Home, where he invites people to sort of bring whatever they're working on, or, you know, different weeks, different people kind of come to the fore. And I proposed trying a Zoom kvöldvaka for the first time. And the way that I created the conviviality was to ask everybody to bring a candle and light it at the same time that I lit mine.
Right.
So that then we felt like we were sitting in a room together around a candle, as we are now, which is why I was so pleased that you lit one. And also you could see each other doing their, you know, embroidery and knitting in all the little squares, and so it did actually feel quite intimate, and it did work. It sort of created this transportive time space, and that gave me the confidence to feel like, okay, I can get to the end of this on Zoom. And I got to the end, and it was the following day that I got an agent, and 3 weeks later I had a deal.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I got the deal, I got the phone call about the deal as I sailed into the village in Iceland where the nest of the title actually lives.
Beautiful. Wow. There seem to be a lot of those kinds of synchronicities and certain timings taking place in that process.
There are, which gives me the confidence that it has a life of its own.
Yes, it's wanting to come out at the right time.
Yeah.
In the right way.
And I'm here to shepherd it a bit, but it can do its own thing. Yeah.
And could you say, what do the words kvöldvaka mean?
It means the evening wake, like not a wake like a funerary wake, but sort of the evening shift, if you like. So it was because, obviously dark came early in the winter months. And then so you'd come inside from the farm work outside and then have an hour or so of relaxation and something to eat. And then the head of the household would light this oil lamp. And obviously all of these resources are limited. So there's one lamp and you light it, and then everybody would gather round and be read to from the sagas, the scriptures, folklore. And, a lot of it is like a response to a scenario. That there's still work to be done. You've only maybe got a couple of books in the house and not much oil.
Yeah.
But actually in doing that, it creates this incredible culture of togetherness, which, it's not common anymore, but if you go to Iceland and say Kvöldvaka, people know what you mean. And I just think this winter particularly felt like a time in Europe where that sort of thing would go down well, to actually come together in a room and be warm, for one thing, to have time to mend things. The actual act of mending is also incredibly cathartic on yourself. And I think in the right scenario where you're mending with lots of other people, it seems to operate on a metaphorical level.
Yeah.
That you're kind of doing something to repair the world as well. So it feels like a sort of act of gentle and radical in the sense of from the roots, resistance to this intense onslaught of horrificness that seems to be coming from every angle, in the news and just in terms of what's happening in world events. It's sort of, a lot of people are going, what can we do? And I know that feeling, and it can be paralysing. And I'm not saying this is going to change any of those things, but it's one small thing that you can do to kind of at least get to a place of some balance.
One way to respond. So on Friday when we were speaking, you were saying that if people would be reading your book aloud to each other, and also at the same time doing this mending or this creating, that would be one of the things that would make you particularly happy. So maybe we can hope that people will feel inspired.
Yeah, it was a lovely question. It was in this session at Uppsala University, and somebody had asked, how would you like for people to read this text? And I'm not sure if she was meaning the question in the way that I sort of interpreted it, but I love it when people come up to me and are buying the book and they ask me to make it out to two people. And they're both buying the book and they're going to read it to one another and take it in turns, because often a book is a thing that takes one person away from the other person. A book in a way is like a lover, and you spend more time with a book than you do with your partner.
Yeah.
It's like in terms of undivided attention, books get more undivided attention than people. So then to buy one that you're going to share, it's like we're going to both. It's not the undivided attention isn't what's necessary. And actually I find when I'm doing these readings, the people who've brought something to do with their hands focus better on the story than the ones who don't, because there's some kind of amazing synergy that happens between the hand and the imagination. Yeah. That means you're not getting distracted by other thoughts that are coming in, of like, oh, did you feed the dog, and did you put that thing back in the freezer?
Exactly. You have just the right amount of attention on the thing that you're knitting or mending or sewing, so that you're fully taking in the story.
Thanks so much for this conversation.
Thank you
and for
so
welcoming
much, Sarah.
me to your home as well.
Thank you for coming. So you know what to do now. Find a good book, Sarah's book or another book, then gather around a candle and get to mending. Links to things we talked about are in the show notes, and I've also included a little list of some of the Icelandic words that Sarah mentions. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.